What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Gamedec. Now, I play a lot of RPGs, specifically isometric RPGs, and even more so, CRPGs. And I like to review them after I complete basically everything there is to do in a game, but including achievements, side quests, etc. There's actually a video that, if you're not subscribed to my channel, will be the first video you see if you click on my channel, and it'll give you a more in-depth rundown of everything I cover in these reviews. But the short answer is as much as possible. Now, a couple important notes about Gamedec specifically. This is an isometric narrative RPG, meaning that the game plays kind of like reading a choose-your-own-adventure book in some ways. I'll elaborate more on the gameplay in a later section. However, I'm aware that honestly just that fact might not do it for some people, so I want to mention that up front. There is no combat to speak of. There are action sequences that you have to work your way through, but there is not combat in the traditional sense. Moreover, because it is a narrative RPG and the story is literally the entire point, we're obviously going to avoid as many spoilers as possible, but honestly, just in showing you some gameplay here, I might inadvertently spoil some small stuff, but we're going to stay away from the heavier side of things. Now, the setup for Gamedec is pretty simple. You are a game detective. Your job is to solve crimes in a real and virtual world. So the game itself is set in a future dystopia Warsaw, Poland, and people have taken to enjoying things in virtual reality all the time. People will live out second lives in there, basically. Kind of literally, because they're in VR. However, crimes and things will still happen across the real world, and Virtualium, I believe is what they actually call their VR world, where people will play all sorts of games and things, and these crimes will still happen, and when they do, people will often get in touch with a game deck to solve their problems. So in some ways, this game is really about solving various crimes, sort of very similarly to the Sherlock Holmes style games from, I believe it is Frogwares. You see a lot of similar concepts between these two games, except of course that this is an isometric narrative game, and there are some key differences, but that's probably the easiest thing to point at and be like, it's kind of like that. Now, when we actually jump into the game, we're going to make a character. We have a few different appearance options, but honestly, it's not very in-depth at all. And the main thing gameplay-wise you're picking here is your background, because this will open up some unique dialogue options depending on what you pick, like high city or low city. But in addition to that, you also get to choose some of your starting aspects at the beginning of the game. Now, aspects are ultimately just a currency that you use to purchase professions. That might be a weird way to put that, but basically, when you talk to people throughout the game, depending on the things you say and how you approach people, you'll be given aspects as a reward for doing it, basically. This comes down to are you kind to people? Are you logical? Are you really angry and upfront about things? And once you've accumulated various amounts of each one of those aspects, you can then spend them on professions. This is going to open up more dialogues as well as options to get you information and help you solve the mysteries and crimes that you're trying to solve as a game deck. And then in addition to this, we also see that sort of mind palace conclusion thing that comes along with investigating each crime that happens in game. So as you get information and go to solve crimes, you'll kind of fill out your mind palace of possible information about things that happened, and then you can draw conclusions about what you personally think happened, and that will kind of advance the plot of each individual investigation. Gameplay-wise, what this ultimately comes down to is a ton of talking to people and exploring the virtual worlds in which they put you in. And because of this, you're going to be reading a lot of text because none of the game is really voice acted, which is honestly a shame. However, that is probably a budgetary thing. But this is a game that definitely could have done with some voice acting, frankly. But I did want to mention that while it is easy to say that this is like reading a book, for instance, that's actually an especially funny way to put it for this game, because this game is literally based on books by an author. Truthfully, I cannot pronounce this person's name. However, judging by the game, seems like some interesting writing. Now, in addition to that, while you're out exploring, you will occasionally find funny references. For instance, if you've ever laughed at the Farmville stuff from Facebook way back in the day, they've got kind of a funny reference to that in your investigations, one of which takes place in a place called Harvest Time, which is kind of just a spoof of that. And then they even take a jab at Star Citizen and some emails you can read in one part of the game. So there is some stuff like that to find and explore. But overall, the game is going to run you about 10 hours for a first playthrough roughly, and then probably about 20 if you try to see all the endings and all the variations and stuff. because there are, of course, with this being this style of game, multiple endings. Things can go a lot of different ways. I will say this about the story. I thought it was very cool. I liked how they kind of brought everything together towards the end. And while I don't want to spoil it, of course, the overall narrative, if you're into a narrative CRPG, I thought was pretty rewarding to actually see play out if you like these kinds of games. So to draw a conclusion for Gamedec here, my conclusion would be this. I enjoy the game. I think you should play it. However, that is while acknowledging two things. One, obviously this game is not for everyone. It being a narrative CRPG, that's just not everybody's cup of tea, so it really comes down to whether or not you like that, I would say, more than anything else. However, I will mention one other thing that I think is very much so to the game's detriment, besides, again, mentioning that there is no voice acting, which is, again, in my opinion, quite a detriment to a game like this. But the other big thing I want to mention is the actual price of the game. This is sitting at $29.99, which for a 10-hour narrative experience, I think is a little much. I personally would have liked to have seen that around $20. So my official recommendation, if you will, would be to wait for it to be on sale, because while I don't necessarily have a problem with it being $30, personally I feel like that's asking a little much for a game like this. So official recommendation, I'd pick it up on sale if you like narrative CRPGs. It has a cool story to tell you, and I had a lot of fun with it in the roughly 23 or 24 hours I spent with it. So there you go, guys. There is a look at Gamedec after 100%. If you enjoyed it, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.